infant disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Ron Bickelman, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the June 6th and 7th issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. hiring gathers steam. Growth of 172,000 job tops estimates marks third straight monthly increase. U.S. labor market has climbed out of a rut. The country added a seasonally adjusted 172,000 jobs in May, the Labor Department said Friday, posting strong payroll gains for the third month in a row and beating expectations. Despite uncertainties around the Iran war, inflation, trade, and artificial intelligence, the report suggests the U.S. labor market is steadily recovering from its weak patch last fall and winter. With inflation rising and hiring healthy, the question for the Federal Reserve is no longer when to cut rates, but whether to raise them. Treasury yields climbed Friday, and traders upped their bets that the central bank would raise interest rates by the end of the year. Some Fed officials had already suggested in recent days that the central bank should be prepared to raise rates. A rebounding job market helps them build that case. Stocks fell across a broad range of sectors on Friday. The Dow Jones Industrial fell nearly 700 points, more than 1%, and S&P fell over 2%. The tech-heavy NASDAQ Composite sank more than 4%, its biggest one-day percentage drop in more than a year. May jobs reports blew past 80,000 jobs that analysts polled by the Wall Street Journal had expected to see. The unemployment rate stayed unchanged at 4.3% in May, in line with economists' expectations. The share of people working or looking for work remained unchanged from April at 61.8%. What we're seeing here is the catch-up from last year, where employers were on pause due to uncertainties with President Trump's trade policies and federal government cuts, said Sarah House, senior economist at Wells Fargo. Payroll gains have averaged 188,000 over the past 3 months, a pace not seen since March of 2024. Heading into the summer months and the coming up World Soccer Tournament, a number of sectors posted outsized job gains. Leisure and hospitality added 70,000 new jobs. Local government hiring jumped with 55,000 new jobs, the biggest monthly gain in over 2 years. The healthcare and social assistance sector also created 47,000 new jobs, and the construction sector posted modest gains for the third month in a row. The retail, information, and financial sectors lost jobs in May. Air transportation employment declined by nearly 9,000 in May, reflecting the collapse of the budget carrier Sprint Airlines. Friday's report showed job growth in April and March was significantly stronger than earlier estimated. March job gains were revised up by 20,000 to 214,000, the largest monthly gain since December of 2024. April payroll gains revised up by 64,000 to 179,000. Higher inflation stemming from a jump in energy costs has taken a bigger bite out of workers' earnings in recent months. In May, year over year, yearly average hourly earnings rose 3.4%, cooling from 3.6% in April. That points to a continued squeeze on households' purchasing power. Hiring trends have been looking sunnier this spring after a rough fall and winter. Although the war in Iraq, now in the fourth month, prompted a sharp pickup in energy prices that drives up costs for businesses, U.S. employers have been posting more job openings. High-profile companies have conducted large-scale layoffs, but those jobs losses haven't pushed the unemployment rate higher. Still, many workers and people looking for work remain anxious about their own prospects. Friday's report showed the share of long-term unemployed or people without a job for 27 weeks or longer jumped to 27.5% in May, up from 25.3% in April, the highest since December 2021. U.S. consumers report feeling miserable about the economy, gas prices, inflation, and the labor market. A key measure of consumer sentiment has hit an all-time lows in recent months and amid anxiety about the future inflation. People keep spending, though high-end consumers continue to drive the economy. Earlier this week, Dollar General reported that consumers are feeling stressed. They are increasingly reining in and spending on household expenses such as groceries as they face higher prices as gas prices jump. Macy's, though, said consumers are snapping up leather jackets and other high-priced items. Despite war on consumer anxiety, the big U.S. companies are piling up profits, with more than 98% of the S&P 500 companies reporting results for the first quarter. Year-over-year growth in earnings per share is up about 29%, according to estimates from financial firm LSEG. Trump urges new spy chief to fire intelligence staffers. President Trump said he wants Bill Pulte, his incoming acting director of national intelligence, to begin firing a large number of employees as part of the shakeup of the U.S. intelligence community. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal on Friday, Trump said he has privately told Pulte that he believes the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which oversees 18 federal intelligence agencies and units, was unnecessary and too big. I'd like to see it smaller. I think there are a lot of people in there that shouldn't be there, Trump said, pointing to the holdovers from the Biden and Obama administrations. Asked whether he is calling on Pulte to fire people, Trump said he wants him to start the process, adding that his eventual nominee to serve in the role permanently should continue that work. Trump stunned many of his own advisors when he said earlier this past week that he was appointing Pulte, the director of Federal Housing and Finance Agency, as his intelligence chief. The move was met with skepticism from some fellow Republicans on Capitol Hill, which raised concerns about Pulte's lack of national security experience. Pulte's role as director of national intelligence on acting basis doesn't require Senate confirmation. He can serve in the role for 210 days. Trump, in an interview, argued that Pulte's acting status is an asset. You're less shackled, he said. It sort of gives you more power, for a somewhat limited period of time. The president said he hopes Pulte can begin making changes across the intelligence community before a permanent intelligence director is confirmed. Frankly, it might be good for him to shake it up before people come, Trump said. Because if Pulte reduced the size in conjunction with me and in conjunction with probably the person coming in, he can do the hard work and shouldn't have to settle somebody that goes in. Pulte didn't respond to requests for comment. Democrats and some Republicans have sounded alarms that Pulte, a close Trump ally, will use his perch to target the president's perceived enemies and politicize the agency. Trump's decision to elevate Pulte was also complicated, a push to reauthorize powerful surveillance program that is set to expire in the coming days. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Early Friday, a Senate vote to move forward to reauthorizing the program failed after some lawmakers cited concerns about Pulte. The president said that on Friday he was interviewing two candidates for the permanent intelligence director role, one for the business, one for the world of politics. He declined to name them. Bill is not going to be there for that long, Trump said. Speaking later on Air Force One, Trump said he had 5 interviews for the job, that Pulte would be acting director for as long as it takes to get the new person confirmed by the Senate. Asked why he wanted Pulte to reduce intelligence staffing levels, Trump said the number has been way too high for a long time. If he could cut, I wouldn't mind that. Meanwhile, Trump told the Journal he wants Pulte to approach the job similar to the way Education Secretary Linda McMahon has managed her agency. McMahon has moved to reduce the size of the department, which Trump had previously said he wants to eliminate the shift to the duties of the agencies. Pulte said last year that Fannie Mae, the government-backed mortgage giant that falls under the purview of his housing agency, was firing more than 100 employees. The administration later fired about a dozen officials in the Fannie Mae Ethics and Internal Investigations Unit. Pulte is the chairman of the board for both Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. Director of National Intelligence is the president's top intelligence advisor. The DNI's powers include briefing the president on most sensitive U.S. secrets, exercising authority over $100 billion annual U.S. spy budgets, and holding over which secrets to declassify. The president said he wants Pulte to release more classified documents related to issues such as the 2020 election loss of Joe Biden. Asked what kind of documents Pulte should consider releasing, Trump said, "I would say everything. He should look at everything and make a determination." In recent weeks, Pulte privately argued to Trump that he would be a good candidate to succeed Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, underscoring her loyalty to the president. The Journal had previously reported Gabbard said last month that she was stepping down. The ODNI has already made far-reaching cuts. Gabbard launched an initiative last year to make the agency more efficient. As part of the effort, Gabbard reduced the size of the agency staff by nearly 50%, according to ODNI's official. The official said that Gabbard said she would be supportive of terminating the agency if necessary. Some in the Trump administration have at times been frustrated with Pulte for bypassing the chain of command to get access to Trump. Referred to some as Little Trump, Pulte won the president's confidence through his aggressive approach to his role on the administration's housing chief. He alleged several of Trump's perceived foes committed mortgage fraud, including Senator Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, Letitia James, Democrat, Lisa Cook, a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Trump pointed to Pulte's allegations against Cook as he moved to fire her as a Fed governor last year. Cook's legal challenge is currently pending before the Supreme Court. Schiff and Cook weren't charged with any crimes. All have denied wrongdoings. Continuing in world news, Harris and Newsom weigh a 2028 election showdown. California Governor Gavin Newsom and former Vice President Kamala Harris have much in common, fellow Bay Area Democrats who insist they're friends but don't always act like it. They drew broad notice in 2003 San Francisco election leading up to the coming generation of California politicians. Newsom Mayor and Harris's district attorney, by turns bumping elbows over the command of the microphone at news conferences. Harris, 58 years old, and Harris, 61, have shared mentors, staffers, donors, friends, and consultants for more than 2 decades, going neck and neck in the parochial world of Bay Area politics. They have exchanged endorsements and snubs, each way or the other, according to people close to them. They've been kind of like two cats circling each other in an alley for years, politically speaking, said Democrat strategist Gary South, who worked for Newsom. They conspicuously liberal politicians live in exclusive locales at two ends of the Golden State, Harris in Malibu, California, and Newsom in Marin County, and appear on a collision course for the keys to a big White House mansion at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Their trajectories have been so fast and put them in place of such prominence, there's only one step up electorally for either of them at this point, said Brian Brokaw, Democratic consultant who has worked for both. Newsom, who is wrapping up his second term as California governor, is widely expected to mount a 2028 presidential bid. People close to Harris said she is undecided, still stung by her 2024 loss to President Trump. In April, Harris got a warm reception in New York from black activists who chanted, "Run again, run again." "I might," she said. "I'm thinking about it." Most early Democratic primary polls show them holding top slots in the field of potential presidential candidates in what would be their first head-to-head contest. In recent months, they have been on the dueling book tours. Harris promoting her book, 107 Days, sold out every spaces around the U.S. in more than 6 months, and its publication. Newsom later released his own book, a memoir titled "The Young Man in a Hurry." He made rounds in a tour, including New York, South Carolina, and Georgia. Their respective teams keep an eye on the other's book sales, said people familiar with the matter. The former vice president's book, which released in September, has sold more than 385,000 copies through May 23rd, according to the data from the Circana book scan. Newsom's book, released in February, sold more than 100,000 copies in close to 13 weeks. Both PACs reported buying and distributing books to supporters. Newsom spending $1.6 million this week. His book went on sale. Harris' PAC spent $97,000. Her books during the month Newsom's memoir launched. Newsom told Axios he has only read excerpts of Harris's book, but heard it sold unbelievably well. Harris said nothing publicly about Newsom's. The governor cited a dig in Harris's book. Harris wrote that she called Newsom to secure her support after former President Joe Biden's abrupt exit from the 2024 race. The governor added, texted hiking, "We'll call back," according to Harris, but never did. Newsom has since said he did text Harris saying he had already put out a statement supporting her, that he was the last person she needed to talk to. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The time is 15 minutes after the hour. Newsom has said he did text Harris saying that he had already put out a statement in support. The governor said in an interview later with video streamer Connor Eats Pants that he messaged Harris asking why she wrote in her book that he never answered her. Harris, he said, replied, "On book tour. Get back to you later." Anyhow, Newsom told in an interview that's the relationship. A month after Newsom alleged text snub, Harris is set to accept the Democratic nomination for president in the party convention in Chicago. She's surprised to see Newsom was missing from the roster of speakers. Advisors told her that Newsom had declined a specific slot because of a scheduling conflict. According to people familiar with the discussion, Newsom, who long harbored his own ambitions to be president, considered the convention appearance on behalf of Harris about as appealing as giving a speech at a wedding of an ex, said people close to him. The governor appeared at the convention's high point later that week in a nationally televised moment. Newsom announced California's delegate count, which secured Harris's presidential nomination. He described Harris's accomplishments and their decade-long relationship. Kamala Harris has always done the right thing. Harris and Newsom's spokespeople didn't respond to requests for interview. The governor and the vice president have known each other for decades. He has deep respect for her as a public servant, friend, and colleague. Newsom's spokesman Nathan Click said in a statement declining to comment on a specific report about their relationship. The vice president and the governor have known each other for decades, early days. On election night 2003, neither Harris nor Newsom received a majority, forcing a runoff for their respective races. Harris declared a victory on the night of the runoff for district attorney. Newsom had to wait for the tallying of absentee ballots to claim the mayor's seat. Harris aides believe the results became a sensitive subject for Newsom's team, which largely viewed Harris as a potential threat and a future challenger. According to people familiar with their relationship at the time, former Newsom aides disagreed that the characterization and said Newsom didn't see Harris as a threat. Newsom said in his book he described his margin of victory 6 percentage points a mandate. Newsom's then-wife Kimberly Guilfoyle warned her husband to be wary of Harris's intentions, saying Harris was neither a friend nor ally, according to a person familiar with the conversation. As mayor, Newsom liked to always speak first, so did Harris. If the first mayor was late to a news conference, which was fairly often in those days, Harris would kick things off herself, according to former aides. Harris and Newsom had heated exchanges over the district attorney's office budget, which Newsom largely controlled. People familiar with their relationship said. Guilfoyle, who was divorced from Newsom in 2006, campaigned against Harris on behalf of Trump in the 2024 presidential campaign. When Newsom and Harris were in the second terms, Democrats appeared to nominate Barack Obama as their standard bearer for the party at the 2008 National Convention in Denver. During the convention week, Harris and Newsom appeared at a Time magazine panel featuring politicians selected by the magazine as hotshots to watch. God forbid. Privately, Harris complained about Newsom's inclusion. According to people who attended the convention, she spoke on stage about the need to reform prosecutions of low-level drug offenders. Newsom interrupted her, saying, "I agree with my DA," which is always a good thing. Yes, it is, Harris said. Harris and Newsom avoided electoral matchup after the California Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer announced retirement in 2015. Boxer and then Senator Dianne Feinstein held their Senate seats for more than 20 years, looking on the two states' rising stars. Harris then was state attorney general, and Newsom was lieutenant governor. Newsom spent days talking with strategy with his team, which included some of the same political consultants who worked for Harris. Newsom phoned Harris to let her know before his announcement, said people familiar with the discussion. A few days later, Harris launched her bid for the Boxer seat. She and Newsom told aides they had their decisions independently of each other. Newsom endorsed Harris in her successful 2016 Senate campaign. She later did the same for Newsom in winning his gubernatorial race. During Harris's election campaign for the 2020 presidential election, Newsom told her he would endorse her in California's primary, but kept putting it off, according to people familiar with discussions. He gave an endorsement only when asked of directly in an MSNBC interview. Newsom didn't spend much time campaigning or fundraising for Harris as her campaign wanted. When Newsom did interview on her behalf, he was touted her Democratic rivals. Harris dropped out of the late 2019 as Biden picked her as a running mate months later at the 2022 event in Santa Bernardino regarding the Biden administration's investments in wildfire prevention. Harris questions her staff about what Newsom planned to say, and people familiar with the matter. Vice President made it clear she didn't want Newsom taking over the event, insisting she speak last because she held the higher post. The people said in recent months Newsom and Harris have spoken to Democratic activists at large events across the U.S. to raise money for the party. Harris has headlined Senate party events in the South, while she maintains support of black voters, a key Democratic constituency. Some Harris and Newsom supporters have already decided which of the two they would support, should both decide to run both. Most aren't saying so publicly, hoping to avoid discomfort of giving the bad news to one another. According to donors and advisors, the conflict is expected to be much more worse for the two candidates. Sam Klieg, who served as political advisor for both Newsom and Harris, warned the expected ferocity of such a battle in the San Francisco Chronic a dozen years ago is if they ever run for the same race, it will be a murder-suicide, God forbid. Continuing along in news, the SpaceX workers' wealth is set for liftoff. Gianandrea Lavoie moved to northern Italy 5 years ago and bought a hotel in Pontiba, which he's been renovating. Paying for the project won't be a problem. The former SpaceX engineer was granted shares in the company years ago and is poised to make a big score when it goes public next week, with his stake valued at more than $28 million at SpaceX's planned IPO price. Beyond the hotel, he's already entertaining other ways to spend his fortune, including fantasies of helping the town ready to switch from wood burning to cleaner heating options. I don't want to just die with a pile of money in the bank, he said. Once Elon Musk's SpaceX makes its stock market debut, Lavoie will be among thousands of current and former employees who will be able to more easily cash in on their equity stakes in this rocket and satellite maker, which have been watched soar in value in the run-up to what is set to be the biggest initial public offering of all time. Beneficiaries include not just engineers and other white-collar workers, but also legions of technicians who build the company's rockets, as well as baristas and other salaried employees who work at SpaceX campuses in California, Texas, and Florida. Some have held on to the stakes that were valued at less than $2 a share when they were granted, and the company hadn't landed a rocket. Stock splits over the years increased people's holdings as the company value skyrocketed. Now SpaceX is planning to price its IPO at $135 a share at a valuation of $1.77 trillion, with ambitions to colonize Mars. Employees and other insiders generally won't be able to sell their IPO shares for a few months because of the lockout periods intended to prevent a flood of sudden sales. But SpaceX has provisions that could let some employees sell small quantities as soon as July. Mary Ellen Musselman, 27 years old, doesn't know yet if she will sell her rights right away. I think it'll be an 11th hour decision, Musselman said. Musselman joined SpaceX in 2022 as an engineering officer on a vessel and retrieved rocket parts that fell into the ocean. Off the Florida coast. During her 2 years at the company, she put aside 10% of her paycheck into equity. On top of the equity, she got part of her compensation. She knew it was a risk, but she thought it would pay off to help her start her own business one day. Mariners are not usually stockholders in their companies. They're not always under benefits, she said. Musselman declined to say how much her shares are worth today, but said her goal is to own a repair-based business in Chesapeake, Virginia, where she works as a mariner. Many who hold SpaceX shares have already sold off on chunks of their holdings over the years. About twice a year, SpaceX has allowed employees and early investors to sell their shares, and other insiders and investors in secondary sales. In Italy, Lavoie kept revising his plans as he watched the value of his shares rise. Every year his shares have been going up so radically it keeps messing up my life plans, said Lavoie, 63, who left SpaceX in 2015. Other former employees who spoke to Wall Street Journal have said they hold shares to pay off spouses' student loans, buy their parents' summer home, or cover costs for fertility treatments, and strike out to start their own dream businesses. Juan Hernandez is among those whose lives have already been changed by early SpaceX shares. Hernandez immigrated to the U.S. from Mexico and learned how to weld because the pay was good. In 2015, he heard about a job opportunity at SpaceX. I didn't even know about SpaceX when my friend was talking about it, but the money was sufficient at the time, Hernandez, 42, said. He started as a contractor for $28 an hour and then was hired full-time and given an equity stake valued at $10,000 that vested over 5 years. Like other employees, Hernandez had the option to use a portion of his paycheck to buy more shares, which he did over the years. In 2020, he began selling off chunks of his stake at SpaceX at $36 billion valuation. He used money to buy properties around Texas, build a small real estate business with his wife. His remaining shares are worth around $880,000 at the IPO price. It put me in a comfortable position for life, said Hernandez, who left SpaceX last year. He now works as a welder for Blue Origin's rocket launch site. Let's look at a little employment now. Job reports push Warsh on hot seat. Inflation hawks. Wall Street see rate hikes is likely move. Testing new Fed chief. Kevin Warsh has been the Federal Reserve Chairman for 2 weeks. The bond market and the White House have already picked his first fight for him. Friday's jobs report pushed traders to up bets on a rate of increase by year-end, drew a public warning from a Fed voter that higher rates would be warranted this summer, and prompted one Wall Street bank to forecast a series of hikes beginning in December. Meanwhile, Trump reiterated his frustration with that investors treat strong economic data as unwelcome news because they expect the Fed to respond by raising rates. With great jobs report just announced, stocks should go up, not down, he posted on social media. Stocks sold off. In the current environment, good economic news pushes bond yields higher, and higher yields punish stock prices. Yields rose Friday because investors anticipated some combination of a Fed that raises rates, more persistent price pressures, or both. Trump's top economist went on TV to argue the report showed that the Fed could be cutting rates before too long. The whipshot illustrates the difficulty facing Warsh as he heads into the debut meeting as chairman this month. He looked poised to inherit a much different economy when Trump tapped him in January. Back then, the markets expected the Fed to cut rates as many as 3 times this year. Officials weren't sure the labor market would hold up without more help. And with the labor demand cooling and inflation appearing to drift back toward the Fed's target for the tariff-driven increases, interest rates looked restrictive. 4 months later, nearly every price of that picture has reversed. Hiring has reaccelerated. The AI's build-out is straining supplies of raw materials and electricity, and that's before Trump's decision to strike Iran, which has driven up gasoline and commodity prices. The FedEx long-running debate over which risk to weigh more heavily, a softening job market or firming prices, is now being resolved in favor of inflation-fearing hawks who were skeptical of cutting rates at the end of last year. Among them is Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack, who dissented at the Fed's April meeting. She and 2 others said at the time the Fed should ditch the language in its official statement that subtly suggested a rate cut was still more probable than a rate hike. The Fed is expected to hold rates steady at its June 16 and 17 meeting and get a rid of that language. For now, Hammack said in a statement Friday, it's reasonable to hold rates steady. But if recent trends continue, it may soon be appropriate to act, she said. A second Fed voter, Dallas Fed President Lori Logan, this past week indicated she would support a rate hike later this year if current conditions persist. Wall Street is starting to make its same shift. BNP Paribas on Friday told clients it expects the Fed to reverse all three of last year's quarter-point cuts in a series of hikes beginning in December. The Trump administration badgered the Fed for steeper reductions than it delivered last year, and the summer rate increase talk could push up mortgage rates and other borrowing costs ahead of the midterms. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Time is 30 minutes after the hour. Trump administration badgered the Fed for steeper reductions than it delivered last year, and the summer rate increase talk could push mortgage rates up over borrowing costs heading into the midterm. Senior Trump economic advisor moved off to head off the hawkish turn Friday. The hiring upswing isn't a textbook case where you need to hike rates, said Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council. Trump installed Walsh to expecting lower rates. I'm going to let Kevin make that decision, Trump said Friday when asked about a rate cut at the next federal meeting. Then he added, I'd like to see lower interest rates. Continuing again in world news, Iran's cash demand is Trump's minefield. Tehran wants quick access to its frozen funds, a significant hurdle to an accord. The U.S. and Iran have spent weeks struggling to forge a preliminary deal to end the war. One major reason why they are stuck, Tehran wants early access to hard cash, and it's politically hazardous for President Trump to agree. For Trump, a decision to free Iran's assets up front likely would generate comparisons to his own attacks on the Obama administration for flying cash into Tehran. After a nuclear accord was implemented in 2016, Trump vowed that spring to negotiate a far better deal than that one, which he pulled off, partly because it provided cash to Iran. During the 2016 presidential debate, he told his Democratic opponent, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that the Obama administration had made Iran very powerful with the dumbest deal perhaps I've ever seen in the history of deal-making, with the $1.7 billion in cash. Now he finds himself in a similar situation, eager to extract himself from the Iran war, which is deeply unpopular in the U.S., and negotiating with a regime for whom swift access to cash is priority. Talks have been underway for weeks between Tehran and Washington via mediators. For Tehran, access to tens of billions of dollars frozen by U.S. sanctions is a key demand, offering immediate relief to its damaged economy. Iran wants some $12 billion up front and $24 billion during its 60-day talks that would be opened by initial pact. $24 billion is not much for America if he wants to reach an agreement with Iran. General Mohsen Rezai, senior advisor to Iran's top official, told CNN on Friday, "This is our town, not America's money. This is our own, not America's money." And its leaders are distrustful of the U.S., which went back on a previous deal to free up Iran's money and exited the 2015 nuclear pact, foisting sanctions back on Iran. Washington says Iran eventually could access some seized assets, but the U.S. won't deliver any money up front or commit specific amounts. It's also ruling out broader sanctions relief, such as a waiver that would allow the Iran to export oil and oil sanctions free. The fight over assets is haunted by the political fallout of the past U.S.-Iran diplomacy and deep distrust between the sides. The decision by the Obama administration to fly $400 million in Iranian cash to Tehran when the 2015 deal was implemented, part of the $1.7 billion payment, proved an embarrassing blow to an agreement already under fire. When Trump exited the deal in 2018, he said it provided a legal pathway to an Iranian nuclear weapon, but failed to deal with Iran's missiles or support for terror. It has enriched the Iranian regime and enabled its malign behavior. In 2023, a Biden administration decision to give Iran access to $6 billion in assets tied to a prisoner swap sparked strong Republican attacks. The money was informally blocked after the Iran-backed military group Hamas killed and kidnapped Israeli civilians weeks later. And the U.S. critics of diplomacy have argued that handing cash to Iran will allow Tehran to bolster its defenses and increase support of its network of regional militias. For Iran, a U.S. concession on the cash would show the regime is converting the results of the war into diplomatic success, as officials have promised, and it would stop Washington later reneging on the response. In Tehran's calculus, unfrozen assets are not sweeteners. They are the down payment needed to prove that democracy is worth the political risk, says Ali Vea, senior advisor at International Crisis Group, a Brussels-based think tank. It's an issue in which Iran is likely to negotiate hardest because it goes to the heart of the trust, reciprocity, and domestic credibility. Now let's take a look at the exchange. Americans are keeping their cars longer than ever and transforming the auto industry. Automakers and dealers are changing, shrinking showrooms and adding service bays with perks to adapt to the new normal. Timothy Mason drives a pair of Honda Accords. One is a 2010 model with fewer than 40,000 miles that he uses for his daily commutes in Massachusetts to his accounting job. The other is a 2001 V6 with more than 280,000 miles he uses for tough winter driving. Where's the financial sense in a new car, Mason 41 says. Better fuel mileage? Maybe. But is it going to save me $800 a month? Mason is on the extreme side of something happening across the country. American cars are older than ever. Some drivers are squeezing more miles out of their vehicles and eschewing new rides because of sticker shock, high interest rates, economic jitters. Others are hanging on to their aging wheels simply because they can. Thanks to the advancement in engineering, materials, and safety technology, today's cars last longer than vehicles of generations past. The average vehicle on the U.S. roads is about 13 years old, a historic high, a 10% jump from a decade ago. While cars have steadily grown over the past 15 years, they're trying to pick up after the COVID-19 pandemic, when shuttered factories and supply chain snarls drove up prices. The shift has accelerated in recent years as more car buyers balk at lofty new vehicle prices, and many automakers grapple with the fallout from America's cooling on electric vehicles, which has cost companies tens of billions in lost investments and forced them to rethink their U.S. lineups. The reality is fundamentally reshaping the economics of buying, selling, and fixing vehicles in America. Automakers, along with laser focus on new car market, are now pouring resources into popping up used car sales, aftermarket parts, and maintenance work. Dealers are investing in their repair shops, adding service bays and a phalanx of customer-friendly services once reserved for luxury patrons. All the while, competition for repair work is mounting among the mom-and-pop mechanics, big oil change shops, and tire changing vying for a piece of the fix-it business. 13 years. Average age of a U.S. car is at a historic high. I'm not going to make money on the selling side, but we have to make it on the service side, said Ed Roberts, Chief Operating Officer of Bizard Ford Lincoln in St. Augustine, Florida. And everybody is fighting for a piece of the pie. Wall Street used to gauge the auto industry's health by how many drove new cars off dealer lots. Automakers this year expect to sell about 16 billion new cars to Americans, but increasingly the big money is in keeping the existing fleets alive. There's never been a more competitive landscape for vehicle service, said Skylar Chadwick, a consultant with the auto industry data firm Cox Automotive, partly because of flagging U.S. new car sales show no imminent sign of rebounding. Even used car sales are relatively flat simply because there aren't enough of them to meet the demand. COVID-triggered supply chain crisis of a few years ago prevented automakers from making enough cars to meet the demand. Thomas Sparks, who was watching The miles creep up on the cars he and his wife drive: a 2010 Honda CR-V and a 2014 Toyota Avalon. He's a retired pastor and she's a retired school teacher. Together they have ample income to afford a new car. They just aren't interested. Sparks is considering a new CR-V, but the $40,000 price tag for one that comes with the right features is more than he wants to spend. The cost is actually lower than the average price for a new vehicle, which now hovers around $50,000 according to Kelley Blue Book, but that's around $10,000 more than at the start of the decade according to the same data. Cars continue to get more expensive. Average selling price in April jumped 1.8% from a year earlier. Elevated interest rates make new car purchases even pricier. There's just a big lack of choice between $30,000 and $40,000. A few years ago, Sparks said, the difference might not have been mirrored, but with everything from home repairs to car insurance rising in cost, it's much too high. It's too much, he said, adding, shopping for a car is one of the least favorite activities. Chadwick, the Cox Automotive Consultant, said consumers are really handcuffed to their current vehicles and have no choice sometimes but to repair the vehicle. Ford Motor is hoping to reap benefits from the change in perspective in the company's aging fleet. Usually when the company launches its ad campaign is to sell a new model or tout a deal. Its latest marketing effort convincing people to get their Fords fixed at the company's dealerships. There is a perception that the dealer service is not competitive, Daniel Justo, Vice President of Ford's Consumer Service Division, said. The company is trying to change that. The company this week rolled out ads touting mobile service, where roving technicians equipped with special service vans travel to wherever customers are to perform diagnostics, maintenance, and some repairs on site. Ford is also beefing up its use of connected data to steer its owners to its vehicles. Vehicles, when they encounter mechanical problems such as faltering wiring on air leak, can now beam that information to the owner's app and to the dealer. The information allows the dealer or service shop to get parts ahead of time rather than waiting for the car to be diagnosed at location. Automakers benefit when people are willing to pay more for used models because vehicles with high resale value can command higher prices when they're sold new. GM and other automakers are now working to grow sales of parts that are used for repairs and soup up and customized cars. The certified pre-owned business, where manufacturers offer warranties, extensive repairs, and other insurances on used vehicles, is also booming. Well beyond its luxury car roots, automakers from the Hyundai to GM are beefing up their certified used car programs, covering cars for longer. There's an old saying in the car business: you sell them once in the sales department, you sell them 10 times over in the after-sales part of the business. John Roth, president of General Motors Cadillac brand, said at an investor conference last year. Independent repair shops have proliferated rapidly in recent years, and they're stealing customers from dealers. Even before a dealer's car warranty is up, at dealerships around the country, perks are on the rise for consumers and customers to seek assistance in keeping their older vehicles running. The shift for an industry that has been notoriously slow in adapting to a culture of consumer convenience. Traditionally, dealers are known for long waits, opaque pricing, and inflexible hours. Now companies like Penske Automotive Group, one of the nation's largest dealership chains, are racing to win more repairs and maintenance work, and with perks like work centers equipped with Wi-Fi and copy machines, free cappuccino service for visits and get completed in an hour. It's really just a nice place to go if you need your car service, says Penske Finance Chief Shelley Holgrave. Penske is also adding bays to service capacity, even if it means shrinking showrooms. Each technician, each bay is very profitable, says Holgrave. She expects demand for repairs to continue to rise. Penske dealerships have begun to tick up. Already, the average age of vehicles that come into Penske has begun to tick up. Cars are even a few years old, need more repairs and maintenance than new vehicles. For dealers, fixing cars in older is order of magnitude more profitable than selling them. The service business now comprises about half the average of the dealer's franchise gross profits, according to Cox, but dealers' share of service fell by 12% since 2018 as consumers deflect the independent repair shops. According to Cox study, that came out last year and rattled the industry. Most concerning to dealers, the biggest loss of business came from consumers with cars that are 5 years old. Vehicles typically under warranty. Dealers used to think that a warranty is locking in a customer. Service visits are down, even the cars 2 or fewer years old. In the past, deflections were expected once a year's car's warranty ran out, but now they occur more quickly. National oil chains and tire chains are also greater competition with dealerships with independent shops. Jiffy Lube, one of the nation's biggest oil change suppliers, offers the same basic repairs and diagnostic service and has been rapidly expanding. None of this surprises Scott Loring, service manager at Pine Hill Automotive, a 50-year repair shop in Holbrook, Massachusetts. He described his consumers as largely blue-collar a demographic for whom a new car is increasingly out of reach. Even if people can afford a new car, he said, they may avoid buying one because they fear that the new technology and connected features will require dealer service. The age of older cars isn't distributed evenly across the U.S. according to 2024 data from the S&P Global. Cars in Montana are among the oldest in the industry at 18 years old. On average, in other states, they relatively are younger, like 11 years old in Texas. You get in the higher financial areas and you see newer cars, said Loring, who drives a 10-year-old Chevrolet Silverado pickup. Here they're trying to keep the older ones on the road. Still everywhere now, drivers like Craig Gleason, who are with their new cars for a long hour, becoming the norm. Gleason of Joseph, Illinois, set out to buy a new car 6 years ago, but couldn't find what he wanted amid the pandemic and vehicle shortage. Instead, he snapped up a used Toyota Tacoma, 22,000 miles on it today. Buying a new car isn't on his radar. His wife is also keeping her 2006 Toyota Prius. It's unkillable. I count on the hand the number of repairs I've needed, and I've been stranded, said Gleason, who is a former software engineer now working toward a master's degree in social work. The next car he buys will likely be an EV, but not anytime soon. I will hope to keep the gasoline truck I ever own, he said. I plan to keep it another 15 years. You're listening to a reading of articles and features on the Wall Street Journal Weekend on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Time is 46 minutes after the hour. Now let's take a look at sports. He's nicknamed The Miz and is MLB's hardest thrower. Brewers' Jacob Misiorowski has a fastball that averages 99.9 miles per hour and topped out at 103.6. To fully comprehend Jacob Misiorowski's experience, take a look at one of his outings from last week. The Milwaukee Brewers right-hander unleashed 8 fastballs that traveled 103 miles per hour or more in the first inning alone. He wound up firing 57 pitches that reached triple digits that day, racking up 12 strikeouts over 7 dominant innings. It's a dazzling display of power on the mound without preceding in the history of Major League Baseball, leaving everyone in the ballpark stunned by what they had just witnessed. Everyone, that is, except Misiorowski, the man known as Miz, was entirely nonchalant. That's what I do, Misiorowski said with a shrug. I throw hard. It's the ultimate understatement. In an era where velocities are climbing across the game, the 24-year-old Misiorowski is pushing the limits of what was believed to be possible from the human body. His average four-seam fastball in 2026 registers at 99.9 miles per hour and is topped out at a blistering 103.6 miles per hour. He has already thrown 350 pitches at 100 miles per hour, which is more than any other starter has ever thrown a full season since reliable data became available in 2008. It took him all of 2 months. His tally of 77 pitches at 102 miles per hour is harder is nearly as many every other pitcher in MLB has thrown this year combined, and the results have been extraordinary. Misiorowski allowed just 1 run and 14 hits over 38 1/3 innings in the month of May, lowering his ERA for the season to 1.65. He leads the MLB in strikeouts and walks, plus hits per innings pitched, emerging an ace unlike any other sport has ever seen. That arm, Brewers pitcher Brandon Woodruff said, is superpower. Technological limitations made it impossible to ascertain precisely where Misiorowski ranks in the pantheon of baseball's great fastball artists. Nobody knows for sure just how legendary flamethrowers like Walter Johnson, Bob Feller, and Nola Ryland truly threw. Sid Finch had his 168-mile-per-hour fastball, meanwhile, remains fictional. What's clear is that Mazeroski is the hardest thrower at a time when pitchers throw harder than ever before, meaning he very well could be the hardest throwing starter of all time. With that comes the threat of real danger, giving the dramatic rise to elbow injuries plaguing every sport. Even Brewers pitching coach Chris Hooks admits we're in a space that we don't know. Nonetheless, seasoned veterans can't help but be awestruck by the lightning in Mazeroski's arm. Woodruff has thrown a 100-mile-an-hour fastball exactly once in his career. It was the first inning of his first start in June of 2019 against Hunter Renfroe at San Diego Padres. He remembers the moment perfect clarity because for just about anybody else, hitting triple digits is an absolute pinnacle of a pitching achievement. For Mazeroski, would have said it's like his BP fastball. Mazeroski had always thrown hard. He was sitting in the mid-90s as a high schooler in the suburbs of Kansas City and reached 100 miles an hour while pitching as a junior college and grew into a 6'7" frame. The Brewers took him in the second round of the 2022 draft, and the radar gun just kept ticking up from there. Then in last October, he topped that. In a postseason game against the Cubs, Mazeroski threw 4 consecutive pitches that were clocked over 104. And his eyes set on even more. I always want to throw harder, he said. If it happens in the postseason that I jump up, I have a 5. Awesome. An old baseball adage says that no matter how hard a pitcher throws, major league hitters will eventually catch up. Mazeroski learned that lesson the hard way as a rookie season with a poor command that led to a stretch which he posted a 5.48 ERA over 11 starts. But this year, Mazeroski has cut his walks in half, and opposing hitters have an MLB worst .150 batting average against him. He's added a cutter to the mix to pair with his curveball and slider. Then again, there are times when Mazeroski doesn't need anything else besides his trustiest weapon, a fastball so good that even big leaders usually can't catch up. To Brewers manager Pat Murphy, that might be the most impressive part of it. He pointed to a at-bat in the first inning of Mazeroski's most recent start against the Houston Astros. At the plate was Yordan Alvarez, one of the MLB's biggest sluggers. Mazeroski threw him 3 fastballs, 103.1, 102.8, and 101.8 for strike 3. Alvarez had no chance. The way they look at it, when they see it for the first time, they're like, whoa, Murphy said. That's a little different. 350 pitches this season has 350 pitches this season that Mazeroski has thrown at 100 miles per hour or more. Let's take a look at a book review now. The Path of the Copper Wire. Stretching a telegraph line across the Atlantic was a daunting task and changed the world. You really know for certain, but when you send an email, check your social media feed, or read this newspaper online, you may be sending pulses of light through a conduit the size of a garden hose resting on the floor of the sea. Around 500 fiber optic cables, not counting those owned by governments, stretch for more than 1 million total miles beneath the oceans. They provide the physical backbone for the weightless world of internet. Life without them would be hard to imagine. Those days, fiber cables are laid by purpose-built ships using proven methods. In the middle 19th century, things were different. Within hours of carrying a first telegraph across the English Channel in 1850, the earliest submarine or telegraph, 27 miles of copper wire wrapped in a rubbery substance called gutta percha was broken by a fishing lawler. Laying a cable across the deep and stormy North Atlantic would prove far more difficult. It would take over 16 years before dots and dashes reliably flowed between Great Britain and North America. The tortuous effort was to build that cable is the subject of James Tabor's Lightning Beneath the Sea, The Race to the Wire World, the Dawn of the Information Age. Mr. Tabor, a novelist and a historian, and his book demonstrates his literary skills. Lightning Beneath the Sea is full drama and excitement. While this is far from the book of this topic, there is even another one that bears the same title. Mr. Tabor's research is thorough, allowing him to explore why several efforts failed embarrassingly before a reliable telegraph link across North Atlantic opened in July of 1866. Lead character in the story is Cyrus Field, a wealthy American entrepreneur who retired from his paper wholesaling business at the age of 34. Field knew nothing about telegraphy, and Frederick Gisborne, a down-and-out inventor, approached him in 1854 about inventing a telegraph line. Gisborne has laid a 10-mile link between Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, the first undersea cable in North America. He sought to convince Field that linking Newfoundland to the mainland would make more possible to send telegrams to and from ships across the Atlantic, cutting several days from the time needed to communicate between New York and London. Field determined that such a line would extend all the way to Ireland. He would devote the next 12 years to raising money, hiring experts, improving technology, organizing multiple attempts to push the work forward. Despite frequent bouts of seasickness, Field undertook dozens of crossings between New York and London, seeking investors and cultivating government support. He devoted many years of the effort to the dream, Tabor writes, because Field believed from the very beginning that the warring globe would usher in the new age of world peace. The project was like any other. In 1855, construction of the overland telegraph system had become standardized, Mr. Tabor writes, but no such standard existed for submarine telegraph lines, especially those running through salt water. None had been laid beneath the open ocean. Field pulled together an Anglo-American team whose members had wildly diverse opinions about how the job should be done. The first stage is 70-mile-long cable between Cabot Strait, between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, seemed the easiest, but the venture in 1855 failed badly in front of a boatload of dignitaries brought from New York to observe the technological triumph. A sudden gale tossed the ship so violently that crew members had to cut the partially laid cable to save their vessels. Field, Mr. Tabor contends, was to blame for the fiasco, having bought the wrong cable-laying equipment, hired the wrong ships, and employed the wrong captain. A second attempt, more carefully planned, succeeded a year later. Laying cable on a mountainous seabed across 1,600 miles between Ireland and Newfoundland was even tougher. Mr. Tabor is particularly good at explaining the limits of scientific and technological knowledge at the time when electricity was too often thought of a fluid, and electricians tested currents by tasting a live copper wire with their tongues. The inconsistent purity of the copper could garble transmissions. Residue from the gutta percha insulation could foul cable-laying machines. If the brakes meant to control the pace at which the ship paid out the cable gripped too hard, the cable could snap. The pressure of a wire laying 12,000 feet below the water surface was intense, and effects were unknown. The initial cabling effort in North Atlantic began in the 1850s, and then abruptly when the cable suddenly broke while being released from the ship that was laying it, leaving 380 miles of metal and rubber stranded on the sea floor. A second cable in August of 1858 successfully carried congratulatory messages between Queen Victoria and President James Buchanan and was hailed by the New York Times as a great event of the age. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 6th and 7th issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Ron Bickelman, and thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. A broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability